Too narrow, too thin. Hey, Joe.
Welcome to Carper Town. All right. Nice to see you all. Ed, how you doing? We've got Jeffrey, Jonathan. We've done this before.
Unfortunately, there's not much room for your speech because we have so many.
We should have thought about that.
Yeah, we should have. Would you like to hold it?
No.
Okay.
That's,
Do you want me to hold it? Let's see. Maybe we can make some room here.
I've never had a problem with too many microphones. But our cup overflow, that we got to figure out how to put my speech here so I can see it and turn the pages. And we need a bigger podium. Can you all just hold on till we get a bigger podium? We'll be back tomorrow.
I wonder if we can. Yeah, that's not going to work. Okay. Well, Martha, are you okay holding this like this? Yeah. Okay.
You want to give it a try?
You want to give it a try?
Oh, we'll give it a try.
All
Be
right.
safe. It'll just be right.
Okay.
I think that might work, and then
Don't
you
knock.
can flip it like that. Is that okay?
I'll try.
Okay.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I don't know if you remember your first visit to the riverfront, but I do. And it's actually, go back a little bit in time in history. If you go back, just back to the World War II, I was not alive then, but during World War II, there were a lot of people down here, and they're mostly women. And along the banks of this river, as Ed Friel knows and some others know, as they built ships down here. They built 10,000, there were about 10,000 people working. They built hundreds, maybe thousands of ships during World War II that helped win the war. And when the war was over, all those jobs went away, the shipbuilding went away, and this became an abandoned industrial land. Hello, let me start over. This became an industrial wasteland, and stayed that until a guy named former Governor Russell Peterson and a fellow who used to be, Art Trabant, used to be president of University of Delaware, came and said to a new governor, Tom Carper, you ought to do something about that riverfront and transform it into something beautiful, and that's what we have today. So this is one of my favorite places, and we've been here any number of times with a bunch of you. But that gives us a little, welcome to the riverfront. And nothing's been named after me yet in the whole state of Delaware. We're going to name this place today Carper Town, at least for an hour or so, and then they'll take it back from all of us. But I get serious now. Some 59 years have passed since I first raised my right hand as a 17-year-old naval ROTC midshipman at Ohio State University. And I took an oath to defend our country and our Constitution. I never imagined then that I would take that same oath again and again and again as a naval flight officer and a P-3 aircraft mission commander in an active duty and reserve career that would span some 23 years before I retired with the rank of captain. Those years included 3 tours in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, and their culmination coincided with the end of the Cold War. Today, I'm the last Vietnam veteran serving in the United States Senate. Mark Twain once said that the 2 most important days of our lives are the days we were born and the day we figured out why. And in the spring of my freshman year at Ohio State, a number of my freshman midshipmen were invited to go by our commanding officer, a Navy ROTC unit, were invited to go to not for spring break, not to Fort Lauderdale, not to Cancun, but to Quantico, Virginia, where they train Marine officers. And we said we'd go, although we had some misgivings. But we went to Quantico for 5 days. The last day we were there, we learned that our orientation was complete, and we had the rest of the day off. And the folks at Quantico said, if you're smart, you'll jump on a train and go up to Washington, D.C. It's just maybe an hour or so away. And that's what we did. By the time our train reached Washington, pulled into Union Station, most of my colleagues had decided to head for Georgetown to look for some girls, and they asked if I'd like to join them. Tempted though I was, I declined and said I thought I'd head instead for Capitol Hill. I said I'd never been there, I just want to go and see what it was like. They said, really? And I said, really? And that's what I do. Undaunted that day, I walked from Union Station up Delaware Avenue, past the Capitol, on to the Rayburn House office building, which had just been built and was open that day. I learned there was a hearing going on in that building, the House Judiciary Committee. The subject was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. And after waiting in line for over an hour, I was finally admitted into the crowded hearing room, found a seat, and I want to tell you, I was mesmerized by really the political drama, but the history that was unfolding in front of all of us. 2 hours later, I glanced at my watch and realized if I didn't leave right away, I'd miss our train back to Quantico. So I ran out of Rayburn, ran past the Capitol, down Delaware Avenue to Union Station, found my comrades. We climbed onto our train and off we went. Not surprisingly, they told me they didn't find any girls, or at least none that had any interest in them. And they asked me what I'd found that day. I told them I said, I think I found my future. I think I found my future. 4 years later, at the height of the Vietnam War, I graduated from Ohio State, was commissioned an ensign in the Navy, headed first to Pensacola Naval Air Station and then to Corpus Christi Naval Air Station in Texas, where I would earn my wings as a naval flight officer. Before completing my training there, joining my California-based P-3 squadron on the West Coast, my roommate, a Baltimore native, and I took advantage of a 3-day weekend to catch rides on several military aircraft that eventually took us back from Corpus Christi to San Antonio, to Charleston, South Carolina, to Dover, Delaware. And we ended up at Dover, Delaware. We found out at Dover, Delaware, if we got off the plane, they had no buses going anywhere. In fact, they had no buses. And so we went into the base ops and we said, we're trying to get to Baltimore, can you help us? And they said, you can go stand out front in front of the base on State Route 1, and people will come along when you're in your uniform and offer you jobs, or not jobs, I'll offer you a ride, for lucky a job, but offer us a ride. And so that's what we did. About an hour later, finally, a vehicle stopped. The guy said, where are you going? We said, Baltimore is a milk truck. And the driver said, hop on, and we hopped on, and an hour later we were in Baltimore. But on our way to Baltimore, we drove through Delaware. I'd never seen Delaware. It was a beautiful spring day just like today. It was gorgeous. It was absolutely gorgeous. Mile after mile of just unbelievable beauty. And I will never forget that day. I'll never forget that ride. I was truly smitten by Delaware that day, and if truth be known, I still am today. 4 years that followed me took me to the Bay Area in California, where I joined my patrol squadron 40, a unit of the Navy's 7th Fleet, and the first of 3 6-month deployments to Southeast Asia. Over a 4-year period, we tracked Soviet submarines from as far north as the Sea of Japan, all the way into the Indian Ocean and across the broad reaches of the Pacific Ocean. We also flew scores of low-level missions throughout the South China Sea, tracking infiltrator trawlers and attempting to get in to resupply the Viet Cong, our enemy who were trying to overthrow the government of South Vietnam, our ally. And on those missions, when we found those trawlers and tracked them, we would turn them over to Navy swift boats, one of which was commanded by a guy named John Carey, a highly decorated Navy combat veteran who later became a vocal opponent of the Vietnam War and later ended up in the U.S. Senate. I would join him there in 2001, but not before serving a decade in the U.S. House of Representatives. During that decade, encouraged by then President George Herbert Walker Bush, I led a bipartisan House congressional delegation in 1991 to a post-war united Vietnam. There we met with and presented to that country's brand new leader, a fellow named Des Moines. He was like a Gorbachev-like leader, a change agent. And we met with him, presented to him a roadmap from the Bush administration to normalize relations if the Vietnamese, in return, would provide information on hundreds, maybe thousands of our MIAs. And thanks in no small part to the strong encouragement of Senators John Kerry and John McCain, the Vietnamese ultimately agreed to do so, and we normalized relations. In time, our nations began a diplomatic journey that has led us to the formation of an ever stronger relationship between the two countries today. It also led to a partnership between Senators Kerry, McCain, and me on climate change and on other environmental issues that continues bearing fruit to this day, despite the death of John McCain to brain cancer in 2018. Another close friend of John McCain in the Senate would turn out to be Delaware's Joe Biden, who was elected to the Senate in 1972 at the tender age of 29, when he was still too young to serve in the Senate. I remember reading about him in both Time and Newsweek when I was overseas with my squadron in Southeast Asia that year. 18 months later, I found myself sitting in his living room, half dozen miles from the University of Delaware campus. After completing close to 5 years of active duty, I had resigned my commission from my regular commission in the Navy. I accepted a reserve commission in the Navy, and I won admission into the University of Delaware's MBA program and affiliated as a mission commander with one of the 2 Navy P-3 squadrons that had only really recently been assigned to Naval Air Station in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, which is only about like an hour and a half north of the University of Delaware in Pennsylvania. During my second year of graduate school, I met a fellow named Jim Soules, someone that several of my colleagues here, Ed Friel and Jeff Bullock, know well. I met Jim Soules, a legendary and beloved professor in political science at the University of Delaware. He was planning to run a long-shot campaign for Delaware's lone seat in the U.S. House of Representatives against the incumbent at the time, who was Pete DuPont, later our governor. I volunteered to help in the congressional campaign. And in a remarkable turn of events, 3 months later, while still carrying a full course load at the University of Delaware and flying on weekends with my reserve squadron, Dr. Soules asked me to become the campaign's unpaid treasurer and fundraiser. I accepted, and later that summer joined Dr. Soules and several other senior advisors, including one who's right here today, Ed Friel, and in a meeting at the home of Delaware's junior senator, who was still fresh from his upset win a year earlier over a Delaware political icon, a fellow named Caleb Boggs. There in his home, 31-year-old Joe Biden shared with us that day a roadmap that he and his campaign team followed to victory 2 years earlier. Joe Biden and his team could not have been more helpful to Dr. Soules and his youthful brain trust. Little did I imagine when that first meeting concluded that it would lead to a friendship that has lasted for nearly 50 years, enabling both Joe Biden and me to serve Delaware and our country for a long, long time. With the unwavering support and encouragement of our president over the years, I've had the privilege of serving as Delaware's state treasurer after being elected at the age of 29, when our state had the worst credit rating in the country, and then go on to defeat a 3-term incumbent congressman before leading the effort to clean up our party and center the Delaware Democratic Party and set the stage for me to win 2 terms as Delaware's governor. Working with Democrats and Republicans in the state legislature, we focused every day of those 8 years on strengthening the basic building block of our society, our families, reforming welfare, overhauling our school system while preserving open space, recruiting 10,000 mentors, earning a AAA credit rating, I think for the first time in state history, creating more jobs, I'm told, in 8 years than any 8-year period in the history of our state. And oh yeah, along the line, they let me be vice chairman and then chairman of the National Governors Association. Jonathan over here played a big part of representing our state with the NGA. Well, somehow along the line, I got to be all those things, and it was a gift, really a gift from God. It's been my privilege to support Joe Biden's re-election to the Senate many times, as well as his election to the vice presidency and to the presidency. And meanwhile, he has encouraged me every step of the way. In fact, it was Joe Biden who reached out to me in my last year as governor to urge me to run for the United States Senate seat then held by another Delaware icon for 30 years. And the weeks that followed, Martha and I concluded that we needed more people in the Senate who think and act like governors. And in the end, I took the pledge and I took the plunge, and the rest is history. Once in the Senate, I sought and won a seat on several committees, including the Senate Committee on the Environment and Public Works. And then, encouraged by my longtime friend, Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, I also sought and won a seat on the Senate Committee on Governmental Affairs, which soon thereafter became the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs a year later following the attack on 9/11. I still remain the senior member of that committee today. However, when serving as its chairman a half dozen years ago with the late Senator Tom Coburn, a Republican from Oklahoma, I helped lead our nation's efforts to defend America against a host of threats, both foreign and domestic, while also leading the attack in the Senate on wasteful spending throughout much of the federal government. And today I have the privilege of leading the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, along with my fellow native West Virginian, Shelley Capito. And I'm also privileged to chair the Trade Subcommittee of the Finance Committee, where the ranking member is Texas Republican John Cornyn. I regard them both as good friends and valued colleagues. And speaking of the Finance Committee, a dozen years after a long struggle in the Senate as a new member, I finally won a seat on the highly sought after Senate Finance Committee. But as a relatively junior member at the time, I was still fortunate to author and co-author a number of provisions that became part of the Affordable Care Act, whose passage I still consider one of the highlights of my work in the United States Senate. That brings us to today. Today, I'm blessed with one of the finest staffs in the Senate. That's not just my words, that's the words of our leadership, both Democrat and Republican, who probably value my staff even more than me. If that's hard to believe, but it's true. But we have a staff that is admired not only by Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, but by the House, and certainly by the folks in the administration. My staff has been providing, here in Delaware especially, but all over the state, exemplary services to the people of Delaware, and they've enabled me to author and floor manage what may be the most far-reaching bipartisan infrastructure bill in the history of our country, while co-authoring the Inflation Reduction Act. That transformational clean energy legislation is enabling us today to address the grave challenges that climate change poses for the future of our nation and our planet. And by the way, the cost of both bills is fully offset. Let me just say that again. The cost of both bills is fully offset. Let me add here an aside if I can, and that's serving on the Environment and Public Works Committee for over 2 decades has been a labor of love that I will always cherish. Our committee enjoys a well-deserved reputation as a workhorse committee, one whose members work across the aisle to develop and deliver bipartisan solutions that are lasting solutions. But an even greater blessing has been my marriage to the former Martha Ann Stacy, a native of Boone, North Carolina, and a remarkable wife and partner who has stood by my side for over 37 years and been a source of encouragement and invaluable advice and counsel on more occasions than I can count. Sometimes advice I didn't want to hear, but fortunately I listened anyway, and it's a good thing. Martha is the mother of our 2 wonderful sons, Christopher and Ben, and sons that almost anyone would be proud to call their own. She was a trailblazer during her 27-year career with the DuPont Company and went on to teach for another decade at the University of Delaware. For 8 years, my 8 years as governor, she served as an exemplary First Lady of Delaware, where she focused her passion on improving literacy in the early grades and has served on numerous ways across our state. I'm lucky to have found such a supportive partner. Give her a nice round of applause.
Thank you.
Let the record show that was a standing ovation. Everybody here. As last year came to a close and the new one began, Martha and I began to focus on what I should do next. Run for a 5th term in the Senate, which if I had run and won would be a record. And then ride off into the sunset and just call it a day. After a good deal of prayer and introspection, and more than a few heart-to-heart conversations, we decided I should do neither, but rather I should run through the tape over the next 20 months and finish the important work that my staff and I have begun on a wide range of fronts, many of them begun in partnership with Democrat and Republican colleagues in the Senate and in the House. At the top of the list is to oversee the implementation of major portions of our massive bipartisan infrastructure law with its record climate provisions that I helped to write and floor manage, along with the transformational clean energy transfer provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. Implementation of both laws is indispensable. It will ultimately win the battle against global warming while creating tens of millions of American jobs in the years to come. Looking ahead, the other priorities that I'll continue aggressively pursue fall into a handful of buckets. This thing of the term buckets, what was in a bucket? Well, I only mentioned maybe 5 buckets and a couple of pieces that are go into each of these buckets in the next 20 months. Number one bucket is includes several things. Clean energy, it includes global warming, includes economic growth, and includes broad reaches of the environment. For example, we need to chart a bipartisan path forward on permitting legislation that accelerates the deployment of clean energy projects to help us meet our climate change goals and to create jobs while adhering to the basic bedrock environmental laws of our country and maintaining protection for environmental justice communities. The second bucket is tax and trade, and it includes making certain that the IRS has the resources needed to better ensure that all Americans are paying their fair share of taxes and the taxpayers' assistance is readily available to all who need it. Some may recall the Division of Revenue is like the Delaware version of the IRS. The Division of Revenue of the state, when I was privileged to be governor, won the Quality Award for the state. It wasn't won by a business, it wasn't won by a nonprofit, it was won by the Division of Revenue for the quality of the service they provided. What I'm trying to do with the IRS is to make sure that they have resources needed to better ensure that all Americans are paying their fair share of taxes and the taxpayer assistance is readily available to all who need it. Also in this bucket, as chair of the Senate Trade Subcommittee, I'll help lead the effort to expand U.S. economic engagement in the Indo-Pacific while advocating for stronger environmental standards and future trade agreements that help facilitate the transition to a free energy economy. Clean energy economy. My 10-page turner here got ahead of me. Third bucket is healthcare, and we need to ensure that federal funding for school-based child mental health services is delivered as promised, while we continue to grow support for something called Hospital at Home. It's a program that facilitates home-based care, saving money, and improving outcomes. Ensuring, the thing that goes in the healthcare bucket, I think, would be, or it's 2 things. One is ensuring that the pharmaceutical pricing legislation provisions included the Inflation Reduction Act are fully implemented. And last but not least is to better understand the important role that pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, play in increasing today's soaring prescription drug costs and to develop legislation to address that. Fourth bucket, we're almost finished with buckets. Fourth bucket, one more to go after this. Fourth bucket is workforce. And that would include introducing career scholarship legislation, a new proposal to invest in American workers and address the widespread hiring challenges facing many employers across America. I visit Delaware employers every week, and sometimes outside the country. The thing that I hear most from them is naming workers who are trainable, who'll come to work and do a job. Fifth bucket includes a number of Delaware-specific initiatives, and while there are too many to list here today, among the many Delaware-specific initiatives that I'll continue to focus on in the next 20 months is one, launching the Port of Wilmington expansion, something that's near and dear to a couple of you, Ed, Jeff, and Jonathan especially. Launching the Port of Wilmington expansion and also supporting funding for coastal protection and for our state's magnificent and vital wildlife refuges. And last but not least, I'll continue supporting the Biden administration. How? By continuing to defend truly needed regulations as promulgated, by confirming the exemplary nominees of this president, and last but not least, by supporting the re-election of the Biden-Harris ticket. In closing, you thought I'd never get here. In closing, let me return to my efforts over 30 years ago to help center the party and with the help of Ed Friel and others clean up the Democratic Party in our state. Those efforts have borne great fruit. Listen to this. Every statewide office in Delaware today is now held by a Democrat. Every one. Our party enjoys supermajorities in both houses of the General Assembly and on Newcastle County Council, our most populous county, as well as a majority on the levy court in Kent County where Dover is located. The mayor of Wilmington, our largest city, and the county executive of Newcastle County, most populous county, are both Democrats. While nothing is forever, the Delaware Democratic Party is blessed today with its bench as strong as any I've ever seen in the last 50 years that I've called Delaware home. If there's ever an opportune time to step aside and pass the torch to the next generation, it's coming. In fact, it will be here on January 3rd, 2025, right around noon. But until then, God willing, I'll continue working 60-hour weeks, coming home on the train most nights, as long as this lady will keep leaving the light on for me. And let me close with this. I have lived a charmed and blessed life. I have much for which to be grateful, deeply grateful. And to be honest with you, a lot of the credit belongs to my parents and my grandparents. Some of you know, all were born in a coal mining town called Beckley, West Virginia. But nothing tops the privilege of being married to this lady right here for the past 37 years and helping to raise 2 wonderful sons, as well as our stepson Greg and 4 bonus grandchildren who live in Michigan, and they call Martha bonus grandmother. The other great privilege of my life has been the opportunity to serve the people of the First State and of the United States in so many different roles for so many years. Despite my efforts to win the hearts and minds of every single Delawarean over 14 statewide elections, I didn't want to lose a single vote. I know where there's still out there 1 or 2 Delawareans who may harbor some doubts about me. Fortunately, though, they are pretty quiet about it these days. Having said that, I've never felt the gratitude and affection of so many Delawareans as I feel today when traveling through our small wonder. It is palpable, it is a source of joy, and it is deeply, deeply appreciated. This morning, after working out at the Y, I swung by a Wawa that's not far from our house. I did the same thing last year. We had just passed the Inflation Reduction Act. We've been up almost all night. I was tired, exhausted in fact, and I ended up taking a early morning train out of DC and coming home. Got out of my car at the train station and said, I think I'll go get a cup of coffee at a Wawa. And I drove up to the Wawa and I got my coffee and went to the cash register, and a very nice lady there said, your money's no good here. I'd gotten a small cup of coffee. She said, your money's no good here. And I said, I looked around there, the people were watching, see if I was going to let them give me, if I was a deadbeat, or going to let me get my coffee for free. I said, no, I've got to pay for the coffee. So I've got to pay. And she said, no, your money's no good here for a small cup of coffee. I said, could I get a large cup of coffee? And she said, no, your money's no good for a small cup of coffee. And lo and behold, I thanked her, and they headed out the door. That is just one example of the love and the warmth that I'm feeling in this state. And I hope we turned it manyfold. Thank you very much.
The Senator has time for a few questions.
Any thoughts about who you'd like to see replaced?
Yeah, we I think six years ago, we were torn as to whether I should run for re-election then. Martha and I have an anniversary on January 1st. January 1st, 6 years ago. We went to the Green Room, the Hotel DuPont, had dinner, and Martha said, well, you're going to run or not for a 4th term? And I said, really, I haven't decided. I think maybe I should get out of the way and let others serve. And she said, no, you got to run. We need people like you in the Senate. And if you don't run, we'll have a big primary to tear the party apart. You got to run. And I ran. One of the people who could have run, maybe should have run, 6 years ago, is our Congresswoman today, Lisa Blunt Rochester. I know Lisa, Ed and I have known Lisa. She was an intern in our congressional office a million years ago. And she came to a town hall meeting. She had a little baby girl in her lap and an unborn son in her womb. And she talked to me afterwards, and she said, I'm looking for a way to become involved in public life. And do you have any ideas? And I said, sure. We have internships, and why don't you be an intern? You're in graduate school, and when you finish up, maybe you can come to work with us. She finished graduate school. She came to work for us in the congressional office. And then later, when I became governor, she worked with us in the governor's office and became Deputy Secretary of Health and Social Services and later Secretary of Labor. We love Lisa. And I spoke with her this morning. I said, you've been patient, waiting for me to get out of the way, and I'm going to get out of the way. And I hope you run, and I hope you'll let me support you in that mission. And she said, yes, I will let you support me. And so I'm going to.
Did she say she's going to run?
Maybe I'll have to talk to her.
Hey, can you talk at all? I mean, you describe yourself as a recovering governor. Can you just talk about your term as governor and why you want to think yourself?
As a recovering governor, I'm somebody who goes to work every day, gets up every day, thinking, how do we help people? How do we help people? And one of the best things we can do to help people is to help make sure they have a job. And as governor, you're in a better position to help make sure people have a job and can provide a life for themselves by the work we do in our schools and the kind of schools that we have to educate a workforce. The other thing is just providing a nurturing environment for businesses large and small so that they'll want to be in Delaware and grow in Delaware. I love being in Washington. I love working with my colleagues, Democrat and Republican, with the administration. But that aspect of helping people so directly. We have a constituent services team that we get calls every day. Our 3 offices. Oh, we actually every beginning of every month, for example, the beginning of the month of June, we'll send out a survey to people across the country, across the state rather, asking people how they evaluated our constituent services work. Was it excellent? Was it good? Was it fair? Was it poor? And we're 22 years in. Here's the results for 22 years. Excellent or good, 96%. 3% fair, 1% poor. And if folks don't say that our constituent service was excellent or good, we call them and say, what could we have done better? So it's really, you're hands-on, you're really in the lives of the people of the state, making a meaningful difference in the lives of their children and hopefully their families and our businesses and all. Plus, we just did great things on the environment, great things in preserving open space. Other than that, I hated the job.
What do you make of the Washington that you'll be leaving and the state of it in 2025?
It's actually less divisive, less hateful than you would believe by watching the news. I get up every day thinking, how do I work with Shelley Capito and my environmental public work? How do I work with my colleagues on the Finance Committee, trade and so forth with John Cornyn? How do we get things done on Homeland Security Committee and so forth? And I try to keep good relations with both Democrats and Republicans, and to work closely with the administration. I think and I'm not the only one who does that. I would get a lot more attention from the media if I would say hateful things about Shelley Capito and John Cornyn. I don't. They're my friends, and I value working with them. And so I think that the media plays a little bit of a role in the people's, I guess, attitude toward Washington and feelings about our nation's capital. Can we do better? Sure, we can do better. But I will, as long as I'm there, I'm going to do my best to get things done, create a nurturing environment and an environment where people think of bipartisan solutions as lasting solutions.
And did you talk to the president about your decision?
No, we've left a message. He's a little bit busy, and said, when you come out for water, give me a call.
What do you want named after you?
I know we're driving over here, and Wilmington probably is good, but we have a term. I don't came up with it, Katie. Somebody came up on our team years ago. For everybody that's worked with me, the Navy, Treasurer, Congressman, Governor, Senator, and the term they came up with was Carper Town. And I think the idea of like the Amtrak trains coming in from Washington or down from Philadelphia, pulling in the conductor saying, welcome to Carper Town. I think I could get used to that, so we'll see.
You said at one point, I believe you said at one point, you didn't envision yourself as an 80-year-old senator. You're pushing for somebody who would be an 80-year-old president.
He's in great shape. I've known him forever. I work out probably 6 days a week. Ran about 4 or 5 miles yesterday. Went to the Y, lifted weights today. He puts me to shame, and he's in probably most 40-year-old men. So I think and the other thing, when you're in that position, you have great medical care, just incredible medical care, and people help keep you finely tuned. So I think he's good to go. It's interesting, the meetings I've had with him, including the meeting we had, gosh, over 6 years ago, when he invited me to bring some of my Democrat and Republican colleagues to the Oval Office to talk about an infrastructure bill, to call on us to, go to work on an infrastructure bill. Every meeting I've been a part of, he's actually sharper than the rest of us. So, whatever he's eating and drinking, we need to find out and sell it and make some money.
Senator,
Thank
what
you.
are you going to miss the most?
What am I going to miss the most? No, I'm not sure. I love my staff. And I think Martha would say that as we have just wonderful people on our team. Here in Delaware, and Georgetown, and in Dover, in Washington, wonderful people. I couldn't do this job without them, and I'll miss them the most.
Senator, I know that you've had several Senate colleagues also announce retirements here in the last cycle or two.
Like who? Ben Cardin?
Ben Cardin.
Who sits on my left hand, and the Environment Committee, and on my right hand, and the Finance Committee. We're going to leave a big hole on those two committees.
Does it feel like a moment of change in the Senate with so many faces being changed out in the last cycle or two, and have those retirements played any impact on your decision?
No, not really. I just think Martha and I talked a lot about it, and got some good advice from close friends. Talked to our sons about it. This just seems like a good time to turn the page and move on. Having said that, some of you like poetry. I'm especially a big fan of Robert Frost. There's a great line from Robert Frost you may remember: "Miles to go before we sleep. Miles to go before we sleep." I've got miles to go, and I'm going to make every day count. I'm looking forward to every single one of them. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. God bless you.
You know, I'm telling everybody I was sorry.
Oh, no.
You put me in a position